Good job on the other night. Yeah, I've heard great things. That was the first time he seems y'all getting ready for
Yeah, I think he's trying.
It's a financial good result for the finance. He did.
It's in front of the steakhouse. But I didn't know.
You're all in front of the station. Are you in the street?
Yeah, and these signs are up. These signs. Now.
We'll be starting in just a minute. Thank you, Ashley. You're welcome.
It's my son. Your son.
That's fine.
Let's see if we can get without being in the way.
I'll just put it over here.
Okay, all right, that'll work.
Yeah, I can visit every week. Not really.
Come in all at once, they're gonna do it.
That works.
That's okay, look. You're fine. Just, yeah, keep it supposed to come in, they get by, once they get seated, you put it back up there. Thank you.
Attention, everyone. We are waiting on Senator Jones. He is en route, and we'll get started as soon as he arrives. Thank you for coming.
I'm sorry.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of myself and Representative McClammy, co-chairs of the Joint Study Commission on Grocery Taxation, I want to welcome you all here. First of all, we'll have our clerk, please call the roll for us.
Senator Jones,
Here.
Representative McClammy, Ms. Anderson, Ms. Elabash, Mr. Coleman, Ms. Fuller, Representative Garrett, Senator Orr, Ms. King, here's Zoom, Mr. Payne, Representative Stubbs.
All right, we have a quorum. What I'd like to do, members, we have a diverse group of folks gathered here for this commission. We'll discuss the purpose of why we're here, but first I thought we would go around and let everybody introduce themselves, and if you're appointed, who your appointing authority was, and just whatever you'd like to say, a little bit about your background and why you're here and what you're looking forward to. So I'll start. I'm State Senator Andrew Jones. I work with Representative McClammy and Lieutenant Governor Ainsworth and Representative Danny Garrett to pass grocery tax reduction legislation, and that's why I'm here. So I'm excited to see what progress we've made, what our numbers are looking like budgetarily, and also kind of discuss what the prospects are as we move forward. to a potential next reduction of 1 cent. We're all excited about that possibility coming sooner rather than later. So, Representative McClammy.
Good afternoon. I am Representative Penny McClammy. I'm the sponsor of this joint commission. Just want to say thank you to my Senator Andrew Jones, and also those that he named, to the Lieutenant Governor, our House Speaker of the House, and Minority Leader Anthony Daniels, the Grocery Association, Alabama Rise. I can go on and on and on. But one thing I want to say, I said at the beginning 2 years ago that a change has got to come for the state of Alabama to start reducing tax off of groceries. And so now we can finally say, as Sam Cook says, a change has come, and we are now in that process. And thank you for serving with us today.
Okay, we'll just go around. That's fine.
Good afternoon. I'm Ashley Hooper. I'm assistant to Senator Andrew Jones, and happy to assist this commission in any way I can, and Representative McClammy also.
I'm Michael Coleman. I'm the CEO of the Heart of Alabama Food Bank in the nonprofit world for a long time, and particularly helping people in poverty overcome barriers. Hopefully, it's still going through that. It's certainly one, so I'd like to do.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Akeisha Anderson. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Director for Alabama Rise, appointed by Senator Bobby Singleton. So I'm super excited to be here today. Arise works on issues that marginalize Alabamians due to poverty. And so we are excited about the steps that have been made to reduce the grocery tax and look forward to hopefully eliminating it someday soon.
Rosemary Yellabash. I'm the State Director for the National Federation of Independent Business. I represent independently owned grocery stores.
My name is Catherine Gill Fuller. I work for Lieutenant Governor Will Ainsworth and am his designee.
Hi, I'm Wade Payne. I'm with Mitchell Grocery Corporation. That's an independent wholesaler in Alabama. Our warehouse is in Albertville. We have 31 supermarkets that they own themselves in the state of Alabama. I work with them on that, and I'm here representing the Alabama Grocers Association.
Fantastic. And I'll recognize our folks on Zoom. Let's see, we have Allison, I guess.
Me, I'm Dr. Allison King, and I work with the Alabama Education Association as the Government Relations Manager. And so we're happy to serve and be here to learn about these dollars and how they're impacting our state, and also how they potentially would impact the Education Trust Fund as well. So thanks to all of you.
Thank you, Allison. I think that's it for Zoom, right? Okay. All right. So members, you will see in front of you, we've got a list of all the membership here and their appointing authority. We have a copy of the resolution establishing the study commission, and then a copy of the presentation that Arise will make to us. So basically, the purpose of the before I get to that, let me back up. I think we need to officially elect our clerk, Ashley Hooper, who will take roll and notes and set up Zoom and all that. So, do I hear a motion?
I move that we accept or appoint Ashley.
Second.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, congratulations. You're official.
Yes.
And Representative McClammy and I discussed, so the resolution establishes that we will both co-chair. So what we'll do is we'll just kind of, I'm doing the first half today, and she's going to do the second half here in a minute, and we might just do something different next time. We'll figure it out, but we're going to go at it like that. So we'll hear from different folks. Our goal is to meet yearly after the end of the fiscal year. So that's why we're meeting now in November. Everything October 1, that fiscal year just started. In September 1, the grocery tax decreased from 4 cents to 3 cents. So as we move forward, we want to see a few things, and I know we'll be hearing from Kirk Fulford with the fiscal office here in a moment, but we want to basically see out there that when folks are spending less in grocery tax, that they'll spend that money on other items, and that the state will still have some tax benefit from that. So we want to really gauge the impact of what we're doing. We want to see how it's affecting families, how it's affecting the economy, and that's kind of the purpose of this. And hopefully, by the time of next quadrennium, maybe we'll have a plan in place to deal with the other 2 cents that will remain on the grocery tax. As we know, 4 cents are the state portion. We're now at 3, thanks to the legislation. We'll sooner or later be at 2, and then from there, how we go, the final step from 2 to 0. So with that concludes my part. I'm going to turn it over to Representative McClammy to lead the presentations in the second half.
That was fast. All right, good afternoon. We will now have presentations for our commission. The first presentation will come to us from Alabama Rise, who played a significant role with this legislation. Keisha Anderson will be our presenter.
All right. Well, while she pulls that up, I do want to bring greetings. Thank you so much, Representative McClammy and Senator Jones, for your leadership on reducing the grocery tax. Thank you so much to this commission for giving me the opportunity to speak before you today. And I thank Lieutenant Governor Ainsworth, Chairman Garrett, and others for their role in helping to reduce the grocery tax. You can go to the next one. So I'm going to be relatively brief today. The things I want to talk about is just a little bit of background. How did we get here to reducing the grocery tax? Some of the advocacy work that Arise has done over the years, why this was an important issue to us, as well as what we hope to see moving forward. Next slide. In a nutshell, Alabama Arise is a nonprofit organization that is dedicated to improving the lives of Alabamians marginalized by poverty. We do this by dividing our work into 3 buckets. So we do policy analysis, and I oversee our policy team as policy and advocacy director. We do statewide organizing, and we engage citizens to make sure that they come out to advocate and make sure that their voices are heard themselves. Next slide, please. So our members elect our issues every single year. So everything we work on comes from people that are directly impacted or close to the issues related to poverty and being a low-income Alabamian. We have over 150 faith-based community, nonprofit, and civic groups that make up our membership. We have over 50 of the 67 counties represented. And since the 1990s, Alabama Rise has been working to eliminate or reduce the state grocery tax. And so this past session alone, the picture on the screen is a picture from a recent lobby day, but we sent over 1,400 messages as our members urging the legislature to reduce the grocery tax. Next slide. The reason this issue is so important to us is because over the years, we have found that essentially the grocery tax has been a tax on survival. It is what we refer to as a regressive tax, meaning that it impacts lower income Alabamians more harshly than it impacts higher income Alabamians. And so when we look at the median income of Alabamians compared to the income of the lowest 20% of Alabamians, that is more than twice the income of the lowest 20% of Alabamians. So that's about $55,000 compared to right over $20,000. When we look at how much higher income Alabamians spend on groceries compared to lower income Alabamians, we see that lower income Alabamians spend about twice as much on groceries. So about 10.3% of their income goes towards groceries, whereas about 5.7% of income for higher income families goes towards groceries. Again, that's why we refer to this as regressive. When we think about the amount that a typical family spends on groceries each month, that is about $1,200. When we think about how much of the grocery tax before the reduction, how much that impacted families, we were looking at close to $600 a year spent towards just the state level grocery tax. That does not include local grocery taxes, which is not a concern for us today or at Arise right now. So next slide. Prior to the legislation that was passed this year to reduce the grocery tax, Alabama was an outlier. So on this screen, you can see that Alabama, in red, was one of only 3 states that fully taxed groceries without any form of relief. that, of course, means that the majority of states either provided relief from the grocery tax or did not tax groceries at all. So this is part of the reason why we were so adamant about making sure that Alabama came in line with the rest of the country. Next slide, please. Now that we have passed this legislation, this is the difference between where we stood at the beginning of the year versus where we stand now. So at the beginning of the year, only 13 states imposed the sales tax on groceries. Out of those states, Alabama was one of only 3 without any form of grocery tax relief. Admittedly, still, only 13 states impose a sales tax on groceries. However, Mississippi is now the only state without any form of tax relief. Both Alabama and South Dakota, which made up those 3 states at the beginning of the year, both of us have passed some legislation to reduce the sales tax rate on groceries. At the start of this year, that meant that 6 states taxed groceries at a lower rate than others, and the remaining states either did not tax groceries or provided some sort of rebate. Currently, we have been added to that number of states that offer a lower tax rate for groceries. So now there are 8 states, including Alabama, that offer a tax break on groceries for its citizens. Next slide, please. As we have been advocating to get the grocery tax reduced or eliminated, one thing that has been at the forefront of our fight is making sure that we protect the Education Trust Fund. And so it does not need to go said, the startling stats about Alabama and our education system. We essentially just believe that more resources or tax dollars devoted to education typically results in better school systems and better performance amongst our students. So it's essential for us that as we think about reducing the remainder of the grocery tax, that we are able to protect the ETF. Next slide, please. And so I know we'll be together for a number of years, and so I don't have all the answers for you now, but I do have some things that I think are worth the commission considering looking into, speaking into existence, that we're able to get to the next 1 cent this year. Ideas for eliminating the final 2 cents, I do think are going to require us to be a little bit creative about how we replace that lost revenue. And so some of the things that we might want to consider looking into over the upcoming months and years include possibly modifying our state sales tax codification to include taxing services, professional services, so attorneys, physicians, accountants, etc. We also may want to think about eliminating the federal income tax deduction, which in many ways is a tax loophole that mainly benefits the highest earners in the state of Alabama. Another thing that we might want to consider looking into is eliminating the FICA deduction. This will admittedly impact both middle income and higher income Alabamians, but it would only impact employed itemizers, so people who are retired would not be impacted. And when Governor Bentley suggested this some years ago, past estimates suggested that the max increase per tax filer would be about $276, and that in total, this could bring in about $200 million. Another thing that we might want to look into is adopting combined reporting, which gives or gets rid of corporations' ability to take advantage of a loophole that allows them to pay less in state taxes. So those are things that hopefully we might be able to discuss over the coming months and years, and things that might move the conversation forward about how we get rid of the final 2%. Next slide, please. I just want to take a moment. Hopefully that was short and sweet enough, but I want to thank you all. You all do have my contact information in the sheets that you have been provided with, but I did want you to be aware of the rest of my team that works on this issue in case you ever need to get in contact with others. Carol Gunlock, who is in the audience, is our senior policy analyst and an expert on this issue. Latrell Clifford Wood is our hunger policy advocate. David Stout is our lobbyist, and Robin Hayden, who I believe is in the audience as well, is our executive director. So at any point, any of us will be happy to answer questions for you. Thank you.
Anderson, do we have any questions from the commission? I have a question. Mr. Payne, I thought you had a question. Okay, do we have any questions? For my Zoom members, do we have any questions? Okay, thank you for your presentation, Mrs. Anderson. We're next have a presentation from Mr. Wade Payne with Mitchell Grocery Company, representing the Alabama Grocers Association.
Good afternoon. Okay. Again, I'm Wade Payne with Mitchell Grocery, and I'm here representing the Alabama Grocers Association, which is made up primarily of independent grocers throughout the state of Alabama, as well as some of the chain operations. We appreciate the opportunity to serve and have an opportunity to as time goes on about the impact of this study. Obviously, the sales tax on groceries is a big issue. It's a lot of money. We see that every day, and the folks that come in our stores and buy groceries, and also. Next slide, please. We're going to talk mostly about what we hear and what customers say, but 83% of Alabamians support the removal of sales tax on groceries. That's probably not hard to believe. Most people are in favor of reducing taxes, but it's something that as has already been pointed out, and I won't go back over things that's already been said, but we're just only, we're one of the states that still taxes. Next slide. Polls that have been done show that, it doesn't matter the political side or the demographic side or the ethnic side. The majority of people are in favor of removing the groceries tax. Next slide. So food cost is going up, as we all know. It's outpaced any other inflation during this time period since COVID started. Americans are now spending 11% more on groceries in 22 versus 2021. That number for 2023 is probably going to come in at about half of that, but still, this compounded for 3 or 4 straight years now of grocery. We're seeing a significant rise in the cost of putting food on the table in families around the state. Next slide. As I said, many things have contributed to that. The COVID, obviously, severe weather impacts food costs, energy and transportation costs. We see all the trucks and on the road, the fuel costs, the diesel fuel costs, all of these things that are affecting it. Labor shortage. I know we were talking earlier about the labor and the number of less employees, the number of employees working overtime now, and then the global climate. So all of these things are affecting the cost of groceries. Next slide. So 69% of shoppers say they're spending more money on groceries now than they were a year ago. The average family of 4 spends $1,200 a month on groceries. Next slide. Even with the 1% reduction, Alabamians in some areas are still paying as much as 10%. There are areas where, I don't know if it's the county or city is a little higher, that were paying 11, now they're paying 10. And there are places, though, that people are only paying 8 if it's in a unincorporated area, or in some counties less. But the majority of people right now in the state of Alabama are paying 9% since the tax reduction. So even with the current tax rates, a family of 4 will still spend between $96 and $120 a month on state, county, or local taxes, local grocery taxes, excuse me. As was said earlier, next slide. Alabama is one of 13 states that still taxes groceries. It's Georgia and Florida both have no taxes, and that should be pointed out in that we have a lot of areas that communities, for instance, Orange Beach, it's easy to go into Florida to buy groceries and save 4%. Auburn, Opelika, you can go over into Columbus real easy and buy groceries and save 4%. So the fact that, and we know of other things that people cross the state line for, but when you talk about 4%, that's a lot of money. And it's not a hard trip. So, by removing this tax, hopefully we will be able to encourage more local governments to look at the same thing. I know the city of Clay took sales tax off of groceries last year. I've heard that the city of Hoover has voted and is going to reduce sales tax on groceries by 0.5% come January. So hopefully there's we've started this movement to looking at this and looking at this tax, and hopefully that's going to carry over into some other areas, and people look at this as a real way to help the people in their areas. Next slide. As was said earlier, we are going to repeat each other, aren't we? But we will have the same issues. Grocery tax is a regressive tax. It disproportionately affects those with lower incomes. I'll kind of give you an example that we were talking about earlier, and it sounds like, well, we've heard them, but no, we haven't. Lower income populations, everybody knows that the extra benefits from COVID, the SNAP funding went down. And I'm sure you can attest to that at the food bank, the increase of people you've seen coming in. We've seen that. And in our stores where they're disproportionately higher SNAP stores, we have seen a decline in sales, but we have not seen a decline in sales that match the decline in SNAP. SNAP redemption has declined more than sales. Well, what does that tell you? It tells you that those folks, those low-income individuals, are now having to spend cash dollars for groceries. Well, now that they're spending cash dollars for groceries, they're also paying sales tax on that, where they weren't before. So even if they replace $1 with SNAP with $1 of real dollar, now they're paying $1. What was $1 is now $1.09. So it is a disproportionately affecting low-income people. So anything we can do to help get the tax off of that will help those. States with the highest grocery taxes also tend to be the states with the highest rate of food insecurity, and we see that here in Alabama. For those with low income, elderly or retired persons with a fixed income, rent or mortgage, and medicine are usually the first covered, leaving little for the food budget or other flexible expenses. Next slide. According to the Alabama Department of Public Health, Alabama is the 5th poorest state in the nation, with 17% of adults and 23% of children, 1 in 4, facing food insecurity or lack of regular access to enough nutritious food for an active, healthy lifestyle. Next slide. Alabama has the second highest rate of food insecurity for seniors at 12.8%, as reported by the Feeding America. Studies published by the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition and the Journal of the American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry show that hunger greatly impacts a child's performance and behavior in school. Hungry children have lower math scores. They're also more likely to repeat a grade, come to school late, or miss it entirely due to illness. So anything we can do to put more dollars back so they can buy more food and feed their family would be helpful. Next slide. So I think us as a group, the grocery industry has done a great job of implementing this change. And it was a big change for us. Some of us were familiar with multiple tax rates in the school, but some are not. So this was a big change, and it was a costly change, but it was worth doing as far as implementing. But we think it's been implemented well. Next slide. That just kind of explains, I don't think I need to explain to y'all what chain stores and independents are, but you can see the breakdown there. I work more on the independent side of the grocery industry. Next slide. So as far as we know, there was only one known issue on September 1st in implementing it. And to give Walmart credit for what they did, it was just a simple mistake. When they put it in their system, somebody put in the new rate and forgot to take the old rate out. I'm sure a lot of people heard about that, and there was some negative publicity about it. But the fact is, it only lasted a few hours. Luckily it was Walmart, and they're big enough to fix anything. And so they had it fixed quickly. People that used charge cards were refunded. People that brought their tickets back, they were refunded and given a $25 gift card. So I thought they handled it well. And as far as I know, that was really the only incident in the state, which is good, because it was a big implementation for our industry to pull this off. But we know what to do now, so we can keep cutting it down pretty quick if you just let us. So as you can see, next slide, I'm sorry. Here's an example of a receipt. So I think most stores do it about the same way, but it's very clear on the receipt the difference between taxing on food and taxing on other things. And that's probably one of the questions I've been asked, well, what is the public saying? We're really not hearing a lot, quite frankly. I don't know that people have come to realize it, but they will realize they're paying less, so that's good. But, for those that were expecting to see 1% less and they've looked at their receipts, probably the only thing we've had is people wanting an explanation. Well, I thought it was supposed to be 9% now, but this is more than 9%. Well, you bought non-food, so that gets taxed still at 10. But and it's easy to explain. And we tried to make us and most people in the industry tried to make the receipt as clear as possible so that the customer can know what's going on. And the one thing that was very important to us is that this followed the SNAP guidelines as far as taxable things, because to do it any other way, there was a lot of discussion back there. And going forward, I would hope that all further reductions follow the same formula, that we don't say, well, let's eliminate it on healthy food, but not on other food, or things like that. Because that makes it very difficult on our industry. And anytime we go over this, I do a lot of work with the National Grocers in Washington, and every few years when the Farm Bill comes up, they want to change the definition of SNAP. And, nobody wants to be the sugar police or decide what's healthy and what's not. So we have good guidelines there, and going forward, our recommendation would be that we stay with those same guidelines on any type reduction we look at, trying to take any sales tax off of food. Next slide. So as mentioned earlier, the Alabama Education Trust Fund, it's grown steadily over the last 9 years. Next year, we'll reduce the tax another 1% as long as the trust fund grows by 3.5%. Hopefully it will. It's grown by that every year, so hopefully we'll get to see that other 1% come off. And that'll be another savings of $144 a year for a family. That's significant. As you look at the numbers that was presented earlier about how much is being spent, that's a pretty good percentage of the weekly budget. If we move the other 2%, it would save a family of four over $576 a year, or 2 weeks worth of groceries. And that would make a big difference. That would mean an annual tax reduction of over $600 million. Next slide. Again, I'd like to thank you for allowing myself and the Alabama Grocery Association to have a spot on this group. Hopefully we can answer questions as we go along. It's early. I'm sure the next presenter will have maybe some numbers for us from September. From what we've seen in our company, I looked at, and we have all those stores, but we're broken up into a lot of different corporations. But we have our largest corporation is made up of 18 stores, and I did look at their September report, and we collected $121,000 less in sales tax than we would have if it'd still been 10%. So that's $121,000 that went back to our consumers that we know they respent, hopefully in our stores, but at least in the economy. And if they spent it out in the economy and spent it on non-food, it was taxed. So I think that sales tax revenue will get replaced on its own. Questions? Yes, sir.
More of a comment than just a question, but to address why more people are not talking about the benefits. And it's probably because they're getting swallowed up by the inflationary demands on food, and it doesn't feel like relief right now. But if the tax reduction had not been made, it would be even worse.
Well, that's why I brought that number up. That's a lot of money in 18 stores that customers would have paid if this one move hadn't been made.
Well, the food insecurity we serve 35 counties over half the state. Food insecurity continues to increase due to inflation, families.
Right. Okay.
Any other comments or questions? For our Zoom members?
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, and as we prepare for our next presentation, I think this is a presentation we are all looking forward to. And that is from Fiscal Division, Kirk Fulford, Legal Services, Alabama.
Yep. Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
Oh, microphone. Okay. I know I look like a spring chicken, but I've actually been working for the legislature for over 27 years, and I can promise you that every day since the day I started, I have been listening to or working on this particular issue in some manner or capacity or another via initially with Representative Knight, Senator Sanders, your father, or other people. So it's something that I'm very familiar with, and the various ways that have been discussed throughout the years about replacing the revenue that would be avoided from eliminating the tax have also been vetted and looked at and explored earlier. So I'm just an old cynic, but I actually never thought we'd be standing here with at least one of the sales tax rates lowered, to be honest with you, but just because we've been looking at it for that long. And so I have a click. Oh, yes.
I just want to say thank you for your diligent work on this piece of legislation.
Complicated. I have young people in the office. I tell them if you get anything other than an Excel spreadsheet, I'm lost. You talk to me about other stuff, and you'll have to do it yourself. So.
Yes. That one.
No.
There we go. Thanks.
No. Oh, now do that. No. other way. Back and full circle. There. That may be as big as we can get. Widgets. Oh, that one. This one. Right. Full screen mode. Look at there. Oh. All right. You know why you're here. I'm not even going to talk about that one. So what I do think it's important for you to understand, and some of you know and some of you may not, is the issue as it related to the sales tax on groceries before you passed the bill this past session. Obviously, there was no separate definition of food or groceries in the statute. There was no separate tax rate on food in the statute, which means that everything that was not already identified as a separate rate, machinery or automobiles or vending machine sales, was subject to the general rate of 4%, which is where food fell, both groceries as well as takeout food. And this one's important. Local sales and use taxes, because we didn't change that. Local sales and use tax is the base, meaning what is subject to tax has to be the same as it is for the state tax. We have a Local Tax Simplification Act that was passed in 1998. I think it made it easier for businesses to pay their taxes because there weren't multiple definitions as far as what was or wasn't taxable between jurisdictions. And contrary to what did happen prior to you passing the bill that you did last session, local governments did not have the authority on their own to go and say groceries are exempt. The general law, because of the mirroring with the rates and the bases, the general law prevented them from being able to do that. I know there may have been a couple that got out of line with that, and still are, but they weren't supposed to. There's Attorney General opinions and actually a couple other things that speak to that very thing. So what happened with the bill that you passed is just absolutely night and day difference. Number one, you define food. You define food as a SNAP definition. I worked on that quite a bit through the session, and that you are absolutely, that is the simplest definition to use, and there are other people that wanted to use a different definition and other groups that wanted to use a smaller version of that. It would have made it harder for your people to try to administer something like that. If I think the thought process was there were already registers set up to capture those kind of sales, it would make it easier on administering if you held to that. So food is defined for this purpose as a SNAP definition. We created a separate rate of 4% initially and then lowered that rate to 3%, which is important. I'll get to that in a minute. To 3% September the 1st of 2023, obviously fiscal 2024. The tax rate can be further reduced to 2% on September 1 of 2024 if the average of the estimated growth in total ETF revenues for fiscal 25, which begins October of 24. These dates, they're strange. They don't align with your calendar years. There's October to September. And so it makes it a little difficult as far as timing. But the average of the two estimates have to be more than 3.5%. If that trigger happens, the rate will be lowered by another 1% in that particular time. If the growth requirement is not met, that doesn't mean you don't lower the rate. It just means you don't lower it at that point in time. You get to continue looking at it until you get to that 3.5% average and can lower it at that point in time at some point in time in the future. It's also important to know that we clarified the definition for food also applied to the locals. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the bases are supposed to be the same, but we wanted to make sure there was absolutely no question that what we have done at the state level also applies at the local level. And then established the fact, which was present law, the general rate applied at that point in time. provided that they could not increase the rate on food after that point in time at the local level, which was important. I think there was lots of negotiation on that particular point between the various local groups. That wound up on the second to last bullet, allowing the locals to lower by no more than 25% their current local rate. And at a point in time when they meet a growth target of 2.5% of the prior year, and if at some point in time they decide they need that money back, they can raise the rate back, but no more than where they had it to start with. So gave them the flexibility to also lower, but also limited what they could do in terms of levying it back. It was also important, some of that language was put in there to keep the locals from actually capturing the money that the state was giving up. If we didn't address that issue, there was the thought process that the locals would simply raise their local rate and assume all of the money that we were giving up at the local level. So what's been going on? Oh, I'll get it eventually. What's been going on with revenues? As you all know, and I say it quite a bit, the last couple of years from 21 to 22 were a complete sugar high in terms of revenues for the Education Trust Fund. Those were absolutely way out of line with normal growth patterns. In fact, I'll show in just a second, is so far out of line that it is pretty easy to see the anomaly there. Lots of federal money, lots of people not being able to get out and shop like they normally do, lots of inflation, lots of reasons why there was a huge increase in revenues over 21 and 22 and actually into 23, but 23 was flat. That's important to know. What that means is essentially is that we had no growth over 22. But at that level, $10.43 billion, we're still far above what's needed to support the budget that's been enacted for 24. So we need no growth in 2024 to support the budget that's in place. I'm gonna get this right. There we go. This is the chart that I was mentioning that it makes it clear to see. This is recurring revenues. That means all the noise has been taken out, any one-time issue, one-time federal money, one-time anomalies have been taken out of that growth line. The two blue places on there represent the recession periods. As you can see, the average growth normally from 2001 to 2020, average growth in Education Trust Fund, this is total growth, a little more than 3%. Average growth from the end of the Great Recession to 2020 is almost 3.7%. But just over the last 3 years, post-COVID, post-COVID, 2021 to 2023, average growth rate of 13%. That's far and away above anything that you could consider to be a normal growth pattern. And obviously, when we're looking at fiscal years and trying to make adjustments, we have to know that and consider that when we go and look at what revenue growth needs to be or should look like. Thought it was important to point this out. This is net sales tax growth to the Education Trust Fund. So a lot of people focus on the gross sales tax collections, and you should, but all of the gross doesn't wind up in the Education Trust Fund. What you're concerned about here with this group is if the Education Trust Fund is giving up a portion of a revenue source, that revenue, what does that revenue source have to grow by to make up for it? The net takes in consideration administrative costs at Public School and College Authority, debt service, and various other things that are deducted from the gross before the money ever gets deposited in the Education Trust Fund, including, if you just focused on gross, automobile sales taxes generally go to the general fund. So if you focused on gross, that number would be included in that, and that really isn't related to what you're talking about here. So I wanted to point that out. As you can see, there's pretty hefty growth in the net sales tax over the last 7-8 years. Obviously, again, looking at the 2021-2022 period, those are higher growth rates than most other years. That, again, points to the situation that I mentioned earlier about the abnormal growth situation. So as the bill passed, the estimated revenue impact of the 1%. This is not considering the replacement of revenue or what might get turned over and respent within the economy. This is just the value of that 1% reduction was estimated to be $152 million to the state. And so to take the other 3% off would be $456 million. Now, understand that those numbers get adjusted every time the Department of Revenue's tax simulation model gets modified to capture the last couple of years' worth of collections. So those numbers will change. Before the time that you have to file your report, those numbers will change. But good thing, as I'll show you in a minute, we have a better way to capture it now than using a model. These numbers were obviously from the Department of Revenue's tax simulation model, which is based on actual collections from previous years, but it didn't have actual collections because, as I mentioned to you, everything was just lumped in the 4%. They had to pull individual items out as best they could because and that may be another thing to mention, is that the sales tax returns for not just groceries, but everybody is a really simple form, as Rosemary can attest to, for obvious purposes, right? You need to make it as easy for entities to pay the tax as possible. But that simplification prevented from being able to capture certain actual information. It doesn't identify what was exempt, what was collected, what was sold. It just says gross sales minus exempt sales equals total sales and pay your 4%. And so, absent a way to capture that data, it was always going to be based on a model simulation that we had. The biggest issue, and what has always been the biggest issue with this particular subject, has been the impact on local governments. Local governments, obviously the state sales tax is 4%. Local governments levy on average about 5.25%. So it would be a bigger dollar figure impact at the local level if you eliminated all the groceries. And that's why it was optional for them to lower by the 1% as opposed to forcing that upon them to do so. And that's always been the case. It's the issue we've had ever since like I said, I've been working with individual members on this issue for years, and that was the one issue that kept coming up. How do you replace the local revenue? I will point out that you are absolutely right. The economy and the world that we're living in is a service economy. The state of Alabama and local governments don't generally tax services on a broad scale. That may very well be something to look at, to consider, to investigate. There are other states that do tax services, or other states that have tax services and thought better of it and pared it back a little bit. New Mexico and Hawaii come to mind. Hawaii taxes services because they're out there by themselves. I mean, they have to have revenue sources other than lodgings taxes and sales taxes. But to varying degrees, we don't tax a whole lot of services at all. So that might be something. And also digital services. So that would be something that I'm not advocating you to consider, but that's something to keep in your mind, that there may be some areas there to look at and try to figure out how you move forward, or how you suggest an elimination and replacing revenue. So this is what is exciting to me, not exciting in terms of where the growth rate was in October. October 2023, ETF receipts were down by $74 million. Understand, the net sales tax collections make up about 25% of total ETF revenues. The largest single contributing revenue source to the Education Trust Fund is income taxes. So regardless of what you're talking about here, focused on the sales tax, the income tax is always going to be the biggest revenue source of the Education Trust Fund. So overall, for context, just overall, to replace or supplant the $152 million, it would only take about a 1.5% growth in overall collections. But if you're just focused on the net sales tax collections, that number gets close to 5%. So everything else, we'd have to sell or grow by 5%, just focus on the sales tax. But again, there's a bigger piece of pie there, and it only has to grow by 1.5% to offset the 152. October returns were down. That's also not alarming to me, simply because October 2022 was up by just about the same amount. It was up by $65 million, 13.5%. October of 23, we were down $74 million, 13.7%. I try to tell people don't look at 1 month at a time and try to glean anything too much out of that. There's a 12-month period in a fiscal year, and if you try to do, it's a $10 billion budget. If you focus on 1 month at a time, you're going to jump to conclusions too quickly or think that something's happening that's not. So again, most of that $74 million decline was income taxes. There was a $21 million decline in net sales tax. 20 of that was just on the gross side. But it can't just be related to the grocery tax simply because I got them to start giving me a monthly report that shows collections by rate. And now that we have a rate of 3% on groceries, I can identify exactly how much was collected in October on groceries from that 3% tax. That number was a little over $25 million, represented almost 11% of the total amount collected for the month. At a rate of what would be about $8.5 million for every 1% of tax. Now, why is that important? Well, at $152 million, if that was the cost of this, that would average out to $12.7 million a month. So if the real number is 8.5, then there's a big difference in what we thought going in versus what actual numbers are showing. But again, that's 1 month in, and you can't jump too quickly to conclusions based on the 1 month period. But it is something that we're going to be watching on a month-to-month basis, and we'll have that report to track and be able to give you information as far as what it's looking like. So it may very well not be, if that trends out, it may not be a $152 million cost to lower the next one by 1%. It may be 110. It may be something significantly less. So we're certainly going to pay attention to that. As far as revenue estimates for 25, the Constitution requires our office to certify those by the third legislative day of the 2024 regular session. There is so much going on with 23 right now that we haven't even thought about 25. Trying to figure out what our baseline is going to be for 24. If these hold out, I'm not really seeing any growth in 24. Now, that's still not alarming to me because we're spending so much below where revenues are that we could absorb a substantial drop off and not have any impact at all on budget. So that's counter to this, or in addition to this, you passed a modification to the Rolling Reserve Act that I think is very important to this discussion and other discussions as it moves forward. And what that did is it limited the amount of growth in spending. Why is that important? Well, as I said, you've got revenues here and you've got spending down here. As long as you can maintain that gap, then you could certainly consider doing some additional things as you go forward without having an impact on the budget. So that was critical in the overall health of the ETF and the overall discussion about this going forward, because you have to look at the two. You can't just focus on the revenue side if you're not looking at the spending side. If you're talking about the impact on the ETF, the money coming in winds up getting spent. So if you know, you've got that big of a difference, you can certainly consider doing some things like what you're considering doing here. That's all I have for the time being. Again, it's early. We just have the 1 month report on collections from the 3%. I thought it was interesting, but I refused to jump to too big a conclusion about what it showed. Although for your group, if that pans out for the next several months, then there will certainly be something to give you hope about a future reduction or elimination, because the cost may very well come down below what it looks like it was when you passed the bill in the first place.
I think we're all happy to at least just hear where we are with that 1 month receipt. Thank you so much. Do we have any questions?
Yes. Point of clarification. So the Education Trust Fund, by what was passed, has to grow by 3.5% for this next 1 cent reduction.
It's based on the estimated receipts that are certified by my office and the Director of Finance. It's not based on actual, it's based on estimates for the next fiscal year.
I guess the clarification I was wanting is that total receipts or sales tax receipts?
Total receipts.
So other things that might be impacting the education trust fund, for instance, the income tax reduction on overtime is going to impact that. Those things could have an effect on this.
Yeah, and overall, we take everything into consideration when we do our revenue estimates for the succeeding fiscal year and the revisions that we're going to make. Yes, so all of that has to be considered when we get to the bottom line number, but we don't focus on any individual number in terms of trying to get to the 3.5%. It's based on overall growth in net receipts to the Education Trust Fund.
Okay, I agree, but I think it would be good to monitor it from just a sales tax perspective, because when we reduce sales tax, but if that sales tax gets replaced in other ways, that to me would be just as important. Just a thought.
Yes, Madam Chairman.
Yes, ma'am.
Kirk, thank you for bringing up the Rolling Reserve Act, because I think that is such a significant change in the way we budget, and we have not had proration since it went into effect. So it's a stability factor that's important for anything we do as far as tax reductions.
That's right.
Correct.
And went in effect for fiscal year 2013. We have not had proration since that point in time. For context, proration means, hey, we don't have enough money to spend where we thought we were going to spend. Let's cut by some figure, whatever we have to get down to a level. Prior to the Rolling Reserve Act becoming effective, we had actually prorated the education budget 4 consecutive years in a row. And if you want to know how that impacted your local K-12 schools, go ask them. It was horrible. There are certain things that can't be cut. You can't cut teacher salaries. You can't cut benefits. So it's basically keeping the lights on. And any of the extra things that you thought you could do at the school that you couldn't do when the budget had to be cut. So that you're absolutely right, and thank you for mentioning the fact that it was night and day difference in terms of where we were versus where we are, and the latest modification was simply a matter of trying to figure out the impact of the last couple of years that were astronomical, and if we had continued down the path of the original act, we would have set spending levels way above what members would have been comfortable trying to keep up with. And so that was, plus the growth percentages in there still provide $500+ million increase in spending authority every year, which is, we haven't approached that on a consistent basis in the last 20 years.
And another question, if you don't mind. Bringing up the income tax, which is the largest producer of revenue for the education budget, I also serve on another committee, the Labor Force, and I think it's so important that we really look at those factors that are either people are not working or they are prohibited from working, since that is the largest source of revenue for that. And the statistics that were shared at the meeting that I went to, it is astronomical, really, when you think about even a 1% change in people working, what the impact that will be not only on their own lives, but their communities' lives.
Absolutely, and I hope and wish you all the success in the world with that commission. I think it's critical that we do that or do something to address it, because you and I and everybody sees all the job announcements throughout the state, and the question that comes to my mind every time I see one of those is, where are they coming from? Right? Because eventually it'll be, you'll have to get them from this job over here to come to work over there, and that's not good for the state as a whole if we continue to have to do that, because we're just moving the needle and not necessarily increasing the total number of people we've got working.
Well, I will tell you that small businesses see that every day, because it is a constant jump, and I know that Wade sees it in his grocery stores too.
Yeah, wage growth, just to try to address that post-COVID wage growth has been astronomical. And I'm not saying it shouldn't be. Please don't think I'm saying that. I'm simply saying that for small businesses, there will come a point in time when they can't afford to pay the wages that they're having to pay for line workers at your fast food restaurants, checkout people at the grocery stores. I mean, the bell's going to toll on that eventually if we don't get more people out in the workforce and get them working these jobs.
Okay, I recognize Mr. Pat McWhorter.
Yeah, so and I know it's not your mention, I'll brag about the Rolling Reserve Act because, it wasn't my idea, but I wrote it, and I have written every change to it since it's been enacted. So I'm absolutely proud of the fact that we were able to, during COVID, as you're aware, the filing date for income taxes got pushed from April to July. Why was that important? Well, for most states, not Alabama, that cross fiscal years. Most states, we're one of only 4 states that have a fiscal year that ends at a different point in time than June. So when the feds moved the payment date from April to July, it crossed fiscal years. There were states that had to get loans to basically finish out the fiscal year and get the next year started. So we don't have the ability to do that, by the way. But our Rolling Reserve Act, part of our Rolling Reserve Act that gets overlooked is the fact that we can access one of our reserve funds in a point in time when we have cash issues. Obviously, moving the payment date for the largest revenue source that we've got was going to create a cash issue. So before that, the deadline of doing so, the finance director transferred the money from the stabilization fund into the education trust fund. Didn't need it, didn't have to have it, but it was there in the event that there was something more catastrophic about to happen than what we thought might happen. Wound up doing exactly what the law says. Before the end of the year, transferred the money right back. But it bought us the time to let that play out and see what the actual impact was going to be of moving the date. So thank you for mentioning that. That was a critical thing.
Mrs. Anderson.
Thank you so much for your presentation, Kirk. I have a question a bit about your institutional knowledge. Just during your time working at the State House, has there ever been a moment that you can recall where the legislature considered taxing services? I'm just curious to know if there might be some old fiscal notes lying around.
There was a study commission. Rosemary may be able to help me. That was probably mid-90s, early 90s?
It was, but in 2003, that was part of Governor Bob Riley's tax plan, was to tax labor services.
Certain services. It was limited to, there was only like a few segments of the service economy that was going to be captured. I think one of them was the automobile service industry, where if you go and get your oil changed, they'll tax you for the filter and the oil, but they don't tax you for what it actually costs them to do the service. So that was going, and I forgot about that one. That was going to be part of it. I think there was a bigger attempt in the early 90s where there was a commission formed and looked at the overall, I think Torbert Commission looked at the taxation of services as a whole. We haven't approached it to that regard since that point in time, but there were, as Rosemary pointed out, there were attempts to tax smaller portions of the service.
And I can tell you that part of that whole tax package, that labor and services was the most unpopular tax of the 11 taxes, I think, because it disproportionately hit lower income people. They were going to pay more than their income. So it was, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was one of the first taxes dropped out of the package. Yeah. They decided to not go forward, but it was a huge fiscal note, and they went so far as to tax haircuts, vet services, and people are unhappy when you start taxing their dogs and cats.
No, that makes
the governor's office heard a lot of that, I can tell you.
I can too.
That makes a lot of sense. I think.
Can add to that.
Yeah.
There past, 5 years, maybe longer, there was a bill introduced to do a fair tax under the guise of let's eliminate income, let's eliminate all these other taxes. We'll just have a standalone sales tax that covers everything, including services. What I mentioned earlier about the states that do tax services, New Mexico being one of them. I've got a dear friend in New Mexico, and he said we tried to, but we immediately had to drop medical services and hospital services. And he said it was just simply too hard to tax. So just figure, if you're levying a sales tax on that, when you go to the doctor, what do you pay? You don't pay the bill when you check out, you pay a copay, right? And not until much later down the road that you settle up and get a bill back from them telling you what you owe. Well, who's responsible for the sales tax? And where does it apply or attach? And the other problem with that was 70% of medical services are covered by private insurance or a Medicare or Medicaid program that you can't tax at the state level because the state can't tax the federal government. So.
And I'm an attorney, and I know the state bar will hate me for suggesting this, but I'm just curious about, has there ever been any look at, attorneys or professional services in that regard where it isn't having that problem of impacting, the lower income Alabamians?
So if you're familiar with Jefferson County local government and their occupational tax issue, that was that particular group of occupations, attorneys, accountants, engineers, architects are specifically exempt from paying any local taxes pursuant to the state law. So they tried to do that, and they tried to levy local. They got sued about it more times but again, that was a local government versus the state. If state did it, it's a different thing. Locals couldn't do it because general law basically said they couldn't. But that certainly has been an issue.
Any other questions? I recognize my members on Zoom. Any questions? Thank you, Mr. Fulford.
Thank you.
We've heard a lot today. This is a great time where we will move forward on our agenda to open floor. I will now turn my chair position over to my co-chair, Senator Andrew Jones.
Thank you. I think what we want to do is hear from the members of the commission. What topics would you like to see us discuss moving forward? Obviously, we're tasked with providing a report by 2026. We've got some time, not going to procrastinate, of course, but we got some time to get our homework done. But as we're moving toward having a product from this commission, what topics would you all like to see us address or have presentations on as we move forward? I'll just open it up for anybody. Crickets. Ms. Alabaster.
Thank you, Senator Jones. I do think it would be very helpful, Kirk, if you could provide those month-to-month numbers. I don't know, Wade, whether you'll see seasonal changes, beginning of school starts, whether you have more groceries, holidays. I think it would be interesting to see the fluctuation in the purchase of groceries and the difference in the tax.
Yeah, I think the hard thing even for us looking internally at our own numbers is we're in the same position that the state was prior to now. We were collecting tax on everything, food and non-food, at the same rate, and we weren't separating the tax. Now, we can make estimates based off of SNAP, but then that doesn't cover the customer that was buying those items that wasn't on SNAP. So it's very hard for us to be able to tell how much of that is really being replaced other than just, total growth. Inflation's going to obviously take care of some of it. But that's the reason I brought up before about the sales tax piece versus everything else in the Education Trust Fund. If that's going to be the guideline that we have now, and if that same guideline is used going forward in our discussions to eliminate the other 2%, I think at some point you're going to have to look at everything involved in affecting the Education Trust Fund. Is that really, because we've got to make up for, for instance, I'm saying we, but if it's got to be make up for what the effect of the new no income tax on overtime rule is going to have and all those things, there's a lot of things that's going to have to be overcome other than the sales tax law in the growth for that same formula to work going forward. It's probably it might work this year, but I don't know about if we proposed it as the formula to remove the next 2%, is that really going to fly? Is that really going to happen? That would just be, and I don't know how you study that. So I'm saying what's concerning in order to get the other 2% off, but I don't know how you figure out what to do otherwise. How do you replace that in the Education Trust Fund? because you'd have to protect it. That's obvious.
Most definitely.
I just want to echo that sentiment. I think that history has shown us that, good economic times do not last always. And so we're very fortunate that Alabama has been in a position in the past few years to have increased revenue. But I am concerned about figuring out ways to where if we do not continue down the path that we're on, what other alternatives exist to kind of create that revenue to protect the ETF, as well as to make sure that we're able to eliminate the grocery tax.
One thing I would like us to see moving forward, the point wasn't lost on me in Kirk's presentation, if I understood correctly, that this was really the first time since we had two tax rates that we could see what was coming in from the grocery tax. Before, it was all lumped together into one. And so we really, maybe they could estimate, but we really don't know if, because of inflation, how much our tax revenues from groceries have went down. We reduced everything by 1%. Has it gone down by an equivalent amount? My guess is no, because inflation is higher. So it's gone down less, and folks are spending that money back into the economy most of the time, and that's getting taxed if they're buying other, goods, non-grocery items with that funding. So hopefully, as we move forward, we can see what the real impact is. I don't think it's going to be as clear cut, take away 1% and you got a % reduction. I don't think it's going to be that clear. Am I right on that, Kirk? Okay.
So the general rate obviously is the biggest one. It's where 80% of the revenue comes in. But now on the report that I get, I have a separate 3% rate for groceries, but there's a 2% rate for autos. So we can break it down every month by how much is collected from the various rates. The problem is, in that 4% is still everything else that's not one of those individual separate rates. So it's hard to pull any individual thing out of there unless we run it through the model. And again, the model is experiencing the same trouble that we are in terms of revenue estimating, because it's having to go back a period in time to a point before COVID, because as I showed you, the past couple of years you can't base anything on the past couple of years because it's just so out of line with what normal growth would be. So we can pull certain things out, but we'll have to see how it looks going forward.
So is it fair to say that this time next year we'll know a lot more than we do right now?
Oh, absolutely. You have a full year's worth of data on the 3%. You know exactly how much each 1% of that was based on actual collections instead of what a model kicked out and telling us. So it's certainly something we've never had before.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to note to the commission members that we will be receiving quarterly updates from Department of Revenue, and upon request as commission members, you are entitled to receive those when you request it.
Yeah, I just encourage you, over the next, until we meet again, think about any items you'd like to see us bring up and address. Obviously, we'll know more moving forward, but hopefully we'll have by the time we wrap this thing up, have a good solid report on how we can continue on our path to a grocery tax-free Alabama. So I'm excited about that. I know
Amen.
All are as well. Anything else?
I'm just excited. We got it rolling, we got it started, and I'm ready to keep on going. So, and I thank you all for taking the time to come here and serve on this commission. And I thank you all, Mr. McWhorter and so many others, along with Kurt Fofer, for just that energy and diligence that you put out throughout the years with Representative Knight and others, my father, with this piece of legislation. And kudos to my senator with your legislation.
Likewise. Well, this is a bipartisan commission, bipartisan piece of legislation, yes, and actually, no member voted against it, if I recall.
No member.
Full support of the Alabama legislature. So
We got to thank the Lieutenant Governor.
That's right.
Oh, yes.
That's right. And of course, the Lieutenant Governor and Catherine Gale, who was instrumental in the legislation as well.
Yes, she was.
So I would imagine we'll probably, this time next year, I would imagine before the holidays is what our goal was this time, but late enough to where we could get the good fiscal data coming in. So we'll try to hit in this same window and give you a little more heads up next time as to when we're going to get together.
Most definitely. And
right.
feel free to contact us within that time if you have any questions or questions or comments or suggestions.
All right. If there's nothing else, we stand adjourned. Thank you all.